Hello and welcome to We Thought About Games, the podcast where games are looked at historically, fondly, and critically. I'm your host, Sid Menon, and tonight we're going to discuss NieR, an action RPG developed by Kavya for the Xbox 360 and PS3. Joining me are Miijhal.
Hi.
And Xain.
Hello.
Since Mi's been on the show in 2 streams already, I'm going to ask Xain first. What's your experience with NieR?
I played it way back when it first came out. I was curious about it because I had read the Dark Ids LP of Drakengard, and I wanted a really out-there story like in that, and I heard that NieR's gameplay was actually good, so I took a chance and pre-ordered it, and I really enjoyed it. It was a pretty touching game for me at that time, because I was still in high school.
Nice. Alright, how about you, Mi?
I played it a few years after release. I had just been hearing about it. Initially, I wasn't interested in it, but as I heard more about it and spoiled myself on every aspect of the series, I got really into it and started playing it. And I've been kind of addicted to NieR since.
Yeah, I played it, I believe it was 2 years ago, because I'd read Hardcore Gaming 101's article on it, and it sounded interesting, and despite the historical view of how good Kavya games are, I was kind of a bit of a fan, and I'd played Drakengard 1 and such, so I decided to give it a go. I knew some things about the game. One of the biggest sort of twists from the very end of a playthrough was revealed really early on, but no, I think it's probably one of the more emotionally affecting games I've played.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it stands out to me as one of the best written games I've ever played. One of the few that I've actually, heavily emotionally connected with.
I can admit that I cried when I got around to ending B. It hit me.
I cried a lot.
I just sort of sat in silence for a bit while ending D played, and I didn't really think about anything else. Alright, so let's get started then. Xain, want to hit us with some development history?
Okay, so a little bit of backstory is that this game was originally going to be about fairy tales. The only remnant of that are some of the character names, as we'll see later on. Like, a lot of the non-major characters are named after various fairy tales, and the original plot was that the main characters would be visiting various fairy tale worlds and going through the plots of those and stopping the villains from reviving this big bad guy. And the reason that they wanted to revive him is because the fairy tale worlds were actually real worlds, and the stories kept repeating over and over. And what the bad guy that was going to be revived was going to do was break the cycle and have the bad guys win, because it was kind of messed up for the bad guys to just keep losing over and over again. And the 13 Grimoires were going to be a part of this as well. They would gather these 13 Grimoires and use that power to beat the big bad. But that kind of changed, obviously, and there are 2 versions of this game over in Japan, Replicant and Gestalt, and if I remember correctly, NieR is Yona's older brother in Replicant and her father in Gestalt.
Yeah, that's correct.
Replicant was only released for the PS3 in Japan, and Gestalt was released only for the 360, but we got Gestalt on both because they didn't think that the US would like a Brother NieR. And Brother NieR originally came first, and then Dad NieR was added later in development. They didn't really change anything about it. They knew that going in. They just wanted the perspective of NieR's relationships to be different between the two. The other thing is that they wanted this to be an RPG for older audiences, so there was a lot of blood and swearing in this game.
And for that version difference, I remember a lot of people at the time who saw, oh, there's the pretty boy anime version for Japan, and then we get the grizzly dad version for America, but there's more to it than that. Not that the scripts are massively different, but what certain things mean to characters and certain character developments would have more impact, or a different impact, depending on which version you're playing.
Yep.
The game starts with looks to be like a modern city just covered in snow, and you see these 2 people duck into a convenience mart running away from something, trying to find food and supplies. So it seems like, okay, some post-apocalyptic story. And then the main character, they're canonically known as NieR, but you can name them whatever you want because people don't really call you by name. He's attacked by these weird glowing shadow beings, and you get to fight them off in a really quick combat section. That's pretty much over before you know what's up. He goes back to talk to his daughter, and it looks like she's sick. NieR is telling her not to touch this book, which has been tempting him that he can save his daughter, Yona, if he gives it. But he refuses, and he gets attacked by more of these glowing beings. He takes a big hit, and so he has to use the book's power. Suddenly he has the ability to use these incredibly powerful magic spells. He just uses a huge magic fist to punch these things into oblivion. And now you get an actual combat tutorial.
I thought this is a really cool open, and I have to say that what this opening does is more impressive when you replay it again or just take a second look at it. But I think my favorite part about it is that it introduces you to the fact that music in this game is dynamic, because the official song on the soundtrack, the song used in the tutorial prologue, whatever you want to call it, it's only one song on the soundtrack, but it goes through a lot of different iterations, and I really like it a lot.
Yeah, usually as combat picks up, more percussion comes in.
It was a pretty interesting way to begin the game, definitely. I do like that it foreshadows a lot and connects the end of the story to the beginning of the story in ways that aren't quite typical.
It's one thing where when you replay it, it actually feels more explained, whereas other games, they'll have foreshadowing early on, but then it takes so long. Like, I complained about Tales of the Abyss in the last episode, but guess what? I'm going to do it again. There was some foreshadowing at the beginning of that game, but there were 40 hours between when that happened and when it was paid off, so I couldn't remember it at all, whereas I could remember the tutorial. You can fight with like your melee weapon, which NieR has a big iron pipe, and also just use your magic with impunity, because there's a meter, but it refills super fast at this point, and the enemies are called Shade. You fight Shade after Shade after Shade, non-stop. You'll be leveling up as you do this. Every 10 levels you hit, you get a new spell, and so you can just try out all these magic abilities that are just ripping these things apart. Once you clear them out, you fight a boss, which mostly just has a lot of range attacks and heavy hitting close range attacks. And one thing that you're going to notice as we go through this is we're not going to discuss the combat in depth as much because, well, there's more mechanics than, say, Resident Evil. In that game, every enemy you encountered sort of changed how you approached it. In this one, you kind of approach enemies in the same way no matter what they are. Even though the combat's not amazing, I was totally fine with it the whole time I played the game. Like, it feels good enough to sustain most of the game. The only parts where it lets the game down are parts where the design of the game itself kind of let it down.
The most interesting part about this game are not the regular enemies, it's the bosses.
They had some interesting designs for the bosses, not to mention the bullet hell mechanics they introduced. Kinda poorly, but...
Yoko Taro has gone on record saying that most of his favorite games are bullet hell games, and it's pretty easy to see that influence.
And when you finish this boss off, a little gauge appears over its head, and you have to strike the head repeatedly to drain the gauge before time runs out, or it gets some of its health back. It's an alright mechanic. I mean, it's in some ways preferable to doing like a quick time event where something cool's happening, but you have to keep watching for button prompts. But it's also, hit the immobile thing for a bit, or you have to do more fighting.
I usually use magic on those parts.
Mm-hmm. Generally solve every problem in the game.
When you defeat this thing, Yona passes out and gets covered in these weird black tendrils that look to be some kind of script. She reveals that because she felt bad that NieR was always protecting her, she touched the black book. It didn't give her powers, and instead she falls ill and NieR shouts for help. And as the camera pans out, you get a view of the city covered in snow as the credits show up. And as what appears to be Tokyo Tower comes into view, something flashes on screen for just a second. And this is something we're going to talk about at the very end.
I think Tokyo Tower only shows up in the Japanese version of the game. Different landmarks for different regions, which is a cool thing.
Yeah. Though I think the way this ties in with another game, it was Tokyo Tower in that game.
Yeah.
Yup.
I still do like that otherwise they largely attempted to make it so that the actual area the game takes place in is relatively ambiguous until you know the full backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Even the music is specifically designed to be ambiguous and not really tie it to any one location.
And then you get one of the weirdest title cards I had ever seen in a game that says 1,312 years later.
It's really specific.
It's like that for a reason, but then the first thing you get is a scene in a house, and it's sort of like a diorama or like a stage play scene, because it's like a cross-section of the house, and there's NieR and Yona in an old-style village. Yona appears to be sick, but it's hard to tell what's happened in the interim, or why they're here. But yeah, you head out to this village, and there's one of those moments in a game where I felt like I could tell it was going to be special, was the town music is just background music, but when you approach someone in the town square, she is singing along with it.
Yeah, that was really cool, hearing that music shift for the first time, and it does it in a different way. I think when you go in the tavern, the song itself changes, or maybe it's just when you go indoors.
Yeah.
The soundtrack was done by Keiichi Okabe and Ryuichi Takata, and it is one of the best things about this game. I'd be hard-pressed to find someone who, even if they absolutely hated this game, which we got some emails to that effect, I don't know if I'd buy it if they said they also didn't like the soundtrack.
I really can't think of a game with a better soundtrack and not praise the hell out of VSOs.
Also kind of odd that the only thing Keiichi Okabe has done before, or at least a couple of tracks he did before, he did the soundtrack for the Tekken games.
Well, some of those have some qualities that elevate them. The person you approach who's singing the song is Devila, who is one of the village elders. She directs you towards her sister in the library, Popola, and you find out that this world is dying because people are being attacked by shades, and disease and famine have wiped out a lot of the population. But NieR only cares about taking care of Yona. So he takes on odd jobs in the village. The way these side quests and stuff are explained feels a little more natural than other games, where you're not going to new places and just solving people's problems for them. These are the people you live around.
I guess we should mention that despite Devila being a village elder, she's not that old.
Devila and Popola are twins, and yeah, they look much younger than NieR as the father character. But NieR's been unable to cure Yona, but he's looking for a cure. Says he needs money, though it's not really clear what he would do with it. You get the sense, too, that the space in this game is really abstracted, because in some cases, like, oh, deliver this thing to another person for me. Even if you were extremely lazy, it's a 1 or 2 minute walk to get to that person. But that's because, the space is just much smaller, so you don't actually have to run for miles to deliver something to someone.
And admittedly, with some of the quests, it does feel like you have to run miles.
No jumping!
One of the first quests actually tasks you with going out to the Northern Plains area and just getting some meat from some land. This is actually a bit of a preview for one of the things you'll be doing in this game when it comes to getting resources. You'll either be killing animals and harvesting their bodies for resources, or you will find little glowing harvest points and just take stuff from them. And this takes a little longer than I'd like. I have a little prompt for each one. I found if on your first run through areas you just grab everything you can, you won't have to do it later, so you can just sort of breeze through.
Unless you're doing something specific, like upgrading weapons.
Yeah. After you get those resources, you head back to the village and shades pop up, and you just have a quick fight with them, but it turns out that this is the closest they've ever been to the village.
They're all small shades, too.
Yeah.
Some of them drop stuff like school books. NieR tells Yona about this flower called the Lunar Tear. Really good girls find it and it will grant them any wish. Yona runs off to the Lost Shrine, which is a distant area that some of the villagers know about, but not a lot of people go there because it's dangerous. Dungeons in this game really don't feel that much different from the field areas, though the music in the Lost Shrine is pretty good.
Yeah, it definitely is.
It is also worth noting that in all the dungeons in the game, they play with perspective and try to have it represent different styles of games.
Yeah, in this case, the Lost Shrine has overhead view block pushing puzzles, which, in terms of first impressions, you'll think, oh no, another one of these, but It's not like Vagrant Story or something where you're doing this a lot. It's the gimmick of this dungeon specifically.
Yeah, and I mean, the puzzles are not hard at all. You're not taking hours trying to figure out one puzzle.
You do get to see NieR's excellent block pushing animation.
He actually has one of the nicer ones I've seen in the game, because he'll push it for a bit, then he'll transition to using his back, and then go back to using his arms. Another mechanic that you'll see at this point in the game, though, is when you kill enemies, you'll get, like, random drops of tutorials. Which is pretty cool, I guess.
It's not really in any other game I've ever seen.
It does, in effect, let you sort of pick up more advanced techniques as you go, because it's not like you'll never get them or you have to, like, hunt them down. They're not rare. You're probably going to get all of them by the time they become relevant. It does let you focus on what you know, and then when you get this thing, you can open up your journal and read it. But the only aspect of combat that really you'll learn at this point, you don't have magic or anything. That was in the tutorial section. You just have a one-handed sword. You can just do a quick 5-hit combo with square, or you can press triangle and you'll do this like elbow thrust move, and one of the tutorials will key you into something. Like, I figured it out. But the elbow thrust move doesn't do any damage, and it's supposed to break guards, but enemies don't guard that much at this point in the game. So what you can do with it, though, is instead of doing the full 5-hit combo, you do the 4 and then the elbow thrust, and it'll reset, so you can just keep attacking.
You can also do a cool charge hit, and the charge hit animation is different for each hit in your combo.
It's pretty good, but also I didn't use it a lot.
Me either.
Because you can just, in that space of time, do more hits. When you advance to the top of the shrine, you will see a book, this little force field, and Yona will be on an altar. So you hit this little field around the book, and it comes to life and starts talking. This book calls himself Grimoire Vice.
He will always call himself Grimoire Vice. Never Vice, always Grimoire Vice.
He will get mad at you if you call him anything else.
Yeah, Grimoire Vice is voiced by Liam O'Brien, who gives this really haughty, holier-than-thou performance that could have been, like, really annoying, but I think they didn't go too far with it.
And he's pretty well balanced out by the rest of the cast. So when he's being a douche, the other characters will straight up call him out on it.
And it especially works with NieR, because NieR is voiced by the inimitable Jameson Price, who is one of my favorite voice actors in all of video games, pretty much. Even his mission briefing voice, which is pretty straightforward in Ace Combat 5, just like, that's the perfect mission briefing voice. Thank you, Jameson Price.
He's a really good voice actor. And you mentioned Tails earlier. He was a Tails character. He was Malik in Tales of Graces, and he was great in that.
Oh, hey, that's the one I own. Clearly I chose correctly. So Vice is able to gain powers from you killing shades. The blood from them will, like, flow into Vice, and you'll hear these weird, like, reverse spoken lines. Vice says that this blood makes him recall powers he had, and he'll learn Dark Blast, which is one of the first spells you got in the tutorial, which is just like a regular flow of bullets. The main advantage is that you can use it while you're moving, otherwise it's not very good, and it will get replaced after not too long.
Yeah, I almost never used it unless it was absolutely required.
And there are a few times where it is.
Also, it doesn't drain your magic faster than it recharges, so you can almost use it with impunity. Once you get Dark Blast, you get attacked by these twin statue guardians lances that have defensive barriers you have to break. After you've beaten one of them enough, you will get the thing that replaces Dark Blast, which is the spell Dark Lance, which lets you charge up and aim much stronger projectiles.
It also looks really cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it also goes into slow motion while you're charging, so you have more time to aim. It does everything you need, and it works really well. So, in cutscene, NieR will use Dark Lance to just utterly annihilate these statue things. Then you'll head back with this book and Yona in tow, but she's been taken by those black tendril things that you saw in the tutorial section, and NieR and Vice identify this as the Black Scrawl, which is apparently the disease that's been afflicting everyone. You head back to the village, and now that you have Vice with you, there's a new thing you can look at in NieR's house, which he says is the diary of his wife. This only shows up if you have the DLC, and this is what that is. It actually doesn't reveal a lot about the story, like, unless you know all those details already about the wider story that's outside the game. This won't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, the main thing it does is it gives you really overpowered weapons and costumes for the different party members.
Also, the game already has weapons that are completely overpowered, so the weapons the DLC gets just kind of throws it over the edge.
But don't get any ideas at this point in the game, because the basic enemies in the very first room of the DLC can kill you in one hit and it'll boot you out.
Yep.
You can take a peek at it if you want, but there's just no way you're gonna beat even the first third of it at this point in the game.
I think it's also worth mentioning that in the DLC you play as Brother NieR instead of Father NieR.
Yeah, that's right. When you enter it, you'll be in like a white room with a single other door to go to, but you'll be the brother, and in the Japanese version, it's the inverse.
Music remixes in the DLC are really good.
Yeah, the boss theme of the DLC and just everything else about it, it's all really good.
Yeah. Devo Popo and a few of the other songs are some of my favorite in the game.
But outside of that, you can talk to Devila, and she will actually explain what the Song of the Ancients is. It mentions an evil black book and a white book that will stop it. And now NieR is convinced that Grimoire Weiss is this white book, and that his power could save the whole world, which is a lot more hope than he had for, I don't care about the world and I'm just gonna cure my daughter.
It gives you your main quest for the first half of the game.
Popla explains that the magic spells you got are these things called the sealed verses, and you need to collect all of them, and this is part of the song, and this is part of what will help the white book defeat the black book and save the world. You also unlock side quests at this point, which are, like I mentioned, the odd jobs you'll do for the people in the village. And they actually, even if it is a minor fetch quest, what's nice is that Weiss and NieR will have like a back and forth about it.
Yeah, the back and forths between Weiss and NieR are some of the best parts of the side quests.
Every one of the side quests has a pretty in-depth backstory to it that kind of helps build the world to the game instead of just kind of being there for no discernible reason.
Well, some of the side quests are for no discernible reason, other than to frustrate the player.
That's true. Though the two primary side quests of interest are, one involves just fetching some seedlings from someone, and this unlocks the ability to use the plot next to NieR's house to farm, which pretty much involves laying fertilizer, laying seeds, and then in 24 real-life hours they will have flowered and you can harvest them. And usually sell them. There are some other things you can do.
I ignored gardening.
I never even touched it. Like, I never thought about it. I just avoided it completely.
I used it for one specific purpose, which is that if you grow a field full of rice, you can sell it for a lot of money. So I was like, well, I'm just going to stockpile this up, and then I can buy the weapons in the village and everywhere. And then I did it again, and that's when I was flush with cash forever and realized I didn't need any more money. You can actually breed flowers besides the two you can buy in the stores.
One of the major focuses of the gardening is to breed a lunar tier.
Yeah, I didn't realize you could do that, even though I actually bothered with farming a little bit, so I didn't know to pursue it.
I think it just gives you an achievement.
Yep. There is really no reason to ever touch the gardening in the game, and it's basically one of the most annoying aspects of the game.
But there is another quest that involves you killing a boar, and after you get the item you need from that boar and you talk to the quest giver, you can now ride on boars in the field areas, and more importantly, you can drift.
Yes, it's so great.
It's actually useful to get around.
Yeah, it really speeds up the travel time.
Also, when you fight enemies, in addition to those random tutorial drops, you'll start getting things called words, which you can assign to actions and weapons and spells in Grimoire Weiss, which now sort of replaces your old menu, and it will add on abilities to them. And these are kind of boring.
Yeah, there's usually only one option. It's basically, oh, make my sword hit harder. Made by magic deal more damage. Make me get more items.
There are some that add elemental effects onto your attacks, but I didn't really see a need ever to do that. This game doesn't have much of an elemental weakness or strength thing going at all.
I'm trying to remember situations where that even comes up.
There are things with elemental weaknesses in this game?
I don't know. There are elemental magic effects. Like we mentioned, the combat's good enough, but there's a lot that's kind of extraneous.
Oh yeah.
Your next destination is the Eyrie, which is a really cool village. It's got a lot of bridges and these individual metal huts that are just all situated, suspended.
All built into, like, the sides of a large canyon, and it looks really cool, and the atmosphere is really oppressive because of the music.
On the other hand, I hated the hell out of the area because it was such a pain to walk through.
Going up is annoying, but luckily the game's pretty forgiving about letting you jump. Like, if you fall from a high height, you'll take a little damage, I think. But it's faster to get around, so it's not like invisible walls generally blocking your way in this game. You have to make a delivery to the town, but the villagers won't come out of their houses, and they all are really afraid of outsiders and keep comparing you to someone named Xain, who, when you leave the village, you'll see a hut outside with a wreath of lunar tears. It'll turn out that they're hers, because she attacks you to keep you away from that wreath. She appears to glow like she's a shade, but only partly. Also, she's wearing a very interesting, shall we say, outfit.
Yeah! She's not so much wearing battle lingerie as just straight up regular lingerie.
Yeah. There's something about her character that you could say it makes sense, but you could have also handled that a billion other ways.
Yeah, really could have been handled better.
Yeah, I agree.
At least the other characters kind of point out that it's a really, really strange way to dress.
Though, to be fair, one of the weird interactions they include is that in another area, Vice will give Xain crap for wearing underwear and saying oh, it must be gross. And she's like, no, I have a bunch of different pairs and I wash them every day. But you have a quick boss fight with Xain. It's nothing too special, but partway through, you get attacked by a giant shade that appears to be sort of a lizard with these gross pustules on its neck and a hand tail.
And it barfs out orbs.
Xain seemed kind of pissed at NieR for almost touching that wreath of lunar tears. She is furious at this thing.
Being furious is kind of her base.
Yeah, Xain, she also swears love. The first thing that happens when you turn on the game, the intro movie starts up, is one of her lines from later in the game of her being really pissed off at Vice, and she swears a lot.
Almost every other line of dialogue of her, if not more.
Yeah, Xain is voiced by Laura Bailey, who does a fairly good job with a really ridiculous script to at least make it sound like an actual person who swears too much.
When it comes to Laura Bailey swearing, she makes that an art form. She's one of my favorite voice actresses.
She's moved on to mainstream stuff now, though.
Actually, I saw an interview with her and I was thinking Xain might come up once, but apparently her favorite character to play is Fetch from Infamous, Second Son, and First Light. So that actually did get me more interested in that game than anything else I heard about those.
She was also the boss in Saints Row 3 and 4.
Nice.
Yeah, I feel like most people choose her for the female boss voice.
I mean, it's straight up the best choice.
You damage the shade, but you don't end up actually killing it. But you do get the other magic ability that's probably going to become your mainstay, Dark Hand, which is the giant magic smashing fist from the intro.
Dark Punch. Punch big. Charge it up, you punch with even more hands.
Yeah, it's pretty great. And the game knows that Dark Lance and Dark Hand are the best spells because those are the ones NieR uses in every cutscene.
You know, I never really thought about it, but it's true.
After that sequence, then you're headed off to another town named Seafront, which actually feels a lot more developed and hopeful and modern than the other towns.
Yeah, it's a trade hub.
The establishing shot of this town actually shows an old lady named Ursula who's climbing up a lighthouse complaining. But before you go meet her, there's a rather infamous minigame that you can get into here. The fishing.
Oh boy.
Yeehaw!
I don't know how fishing works. I caught the one thing I needed to catch to progress the game, and that's it.
The game took pity on me, and auto-caught it for me because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, one of the big problems is that it tells you to fish at a certain location, and there are 2 locations in the area that fit, and the first one that you'll see is the wrong one. So a lot of people have trouble ever progressing past that point.
A lot of people have trouble looking at the big red X on their minimap.
Yep.
Yeah, there is actually a marker on the minimap, but I can see why people would get confused, but also, after I had beaten the game, I thought, oh, there's a confusing fishing part, isn't there? I don't think I ran into that. I just sort of got what this game was expecting of me.
Yeah.
We mentioned the puzzles in the Lost Shrine are really easy. Most other puzzle games I cannot play because I cannot get into the heads of the puzzle designers at all. But the big plot in Seafront, which is not too much, is that there's a post office here, and a lot of the quests in this town revolve around that. And also Ursula, the lighthouse lady, tasks you with getting her mail. And you can read everyone's mail also, but she has been exchanging love letters with someone, and that plot will finish out later?
Yeah, I think before the end of the first half.
Though also, in the tavern in the village, Devil will be singing in the bar, and the tavern keeper will mention that Popola and Devil used to sing together. So you have to go to Seafront to get the only drink strong enough to get Popola buzzed so that she and Devil can sing together. And the reward for the quest is pretty much hearing them sing together.
It's a really nice side quest with just a nice musical reward. Also, the thing I remember about the drink is that it has rat tails in it. The game asks you to get rat tails.
Oh yeah, also, you will get these side quests at this point that are parcel delivery quests for fragile objects. If you get hit during these side quests, the package breaks and you have to go back and get another one. Also, these quests spawn the greatest number of shades on the way to your destination.
It's basically the egg quest in Monster Hunter if it was 1,000 times worse.
Yeah, these quests were pretty frustrating when you can't do anything to avoid attacks.
Luckily, there's 2 in the game.
That sounds right.
Yeah, after this, the other major area is the junk heap, where these 2 brothers operate a weapon shop so that NieR can get better weapons and upgrade his own.
Yeah, that's the big thing. You couldn't upgrade weapons before this point.
This is mostly what you'll use materials for outside of completing quests. But to get materials to upgrade with, the brothers ask you to go into the junk heap and retrieve materials. Also, the brothers run the junk shop with their mother, but she's been missing. So you go all the way to the bottom of the junk heap, and you'll encounter the next boss, which is a giant face.
Basically, you face an boss.
But after you beat the boss, you'll find the mother with another man. This is one of those moments that would probably get played for a massive amount of drama in another game, but when you go back to the junk heap, you can tell Jacob, the older brother, what happened. His younger brother Gideon will just leave after he hears that his mom's dead. And Jacob will mention that, yeah, he knew, actually, that she was seeing this other guy, and that she felt stressed by her responsibilities and everything. It was unexpected for me to see a quest resolved that way.
I think it's worth mentioning that the mother's name was Blue, and the guy's name is Carlo, and they're both references to Pinocchio.
Yeah. You actually have to head back to the area again, where magic-resistant shades have appeared. So these ones have a little energy field around them. Really, the only twist is you can only use melee attacks on them. But they're not that difficult, so it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
But then the giant shade that you fought after the boss fight with Xain reappears, and this time it runs into the area, and you have a real set-piece battle, actually, where after you defeat each phase, you will smash it into a wall, it'll run along, and it's just tearing parts of the area apart, which is really, for a game that's been very grounded and simple and small scale, the first time this boss attacked you, you only fought half of it. But seeing this thing tear through is really pretty striking.
Yeah, it was a really good boss fight.
And when you finally kill it, it speaks to Xain in the voice of her grandmother? which is thankfully something that gets explained in-game later. But at this point, NieR can't hear the grandmother's voice or anything, so he doesn't know any of this is going on. But she seems ready to give in, but then relents because the Shade says something that her grandma would never say, and they impale it on a beam.
Basically, the Shade tells her to give up.
Then you get a scene where it's weird right after Kaine decides to not give up. She mentioned specifically that she wouldn't give up in her quest for revenge, but now that this thing is dead, she's laying down and ready to die.
You're going to live, Kaine.
Me? Live? What for?
What?
I had my revenge. Now it's over.
Oh, now see here. This is rich.
Vice!
We help you in some mad quest for vengeance, and now you think to bid us adieu. How can a fighter so skilled be cursed with such a thick head? A true warrior would fight. They would give all in the service of their friends.
Friends?
Yes. You and I are friends now.
See here, that was hardly the point.
Then what is the point?
Yes, we're friends now. And the weird thing about that is it seems really strange the way NieR says it. In a sense, that's because it's also the same way that the brother NieR character says it, who's much younger, I think younger than Kaine is. But you get the sense that Daniel actually doesn't have any friends, because he doesn't seem to.
Yeah.
Well, he does basically seem really obsessed with Yona.
He's a really hardened guy, so it makes a lot of sense, actually, that he'd find a kindred spirit in Kaine. Then you unlock another spell that's called Dark Phantasm, which sends out a copy of NieR to attack someone, and I never found it useful.
It's good for when you're dealing with lots of little enemies.
Oh yeah?
Because it can hit all of them. You know that thing Wolf Link could do in Twilight Princess? That's basically what it is.
You know what else is good for lots of small enemies? Dark Hand.
Fair enough.
Yeah, pretty much the Spear and the Dark Hand are all you need to finish the game.
Oh yeah, this is also when Kaine finally joins your quote-unquote party.
Having party members around affects very little in this game.
They're almost never actually, fighting with you.
It seems like they're present because it makes sense for them to be there, but honestly, they're in your party more for the purposes of the story.
Yeah, their AI is not that good.
You'll see it as you're fighting this boss that Kaine's hits do almost no damage.
Yeah, I don't remember ever seeing any of the allies actually do any significant amount of damage to anything.
But you get an ally who actually does something noticeable next. But first, Kaine actually thinks the people in the city of Facade might have a cure for the Black Scrawl, which is the first real lead you've gotten in a long time. But the reason Kaine knows about Facade is she saved one of the kids from a pack of wolves, so they owe her a debt. And you'll fight wolves and scorpions in this desert area until a shade-possessed wolf makes the wolves retreat. They're probably the most interesting thing to fight because they're actually really aggressive, so they're kind of dangerous, actually.
Yeah, they're definitely the biggest threat in the first half of the game.
The scorpions can poison you, which is kind of bad because the poison does take down your health a little quickly, but it's like the only thing I can remember poisoning you in the book.
Yeah, I honestly forgot that poison was in this game until you brought it up.
To be honest, I also forgot.
Most of the enemies in the game are just shades, so...
Yeah. Facade's an interesting village. It's got a pretty complex layout that requires you to actually use your double jump and midair dodge to get around.
Oh yeah, and it has the fast travel system that doesn't actually make you go through the town any faster.
Nah, you can just ride a little sand skiff.
The DLC does have a minigame with that.
Oh yeah, the rail shooting segment.
Yeah, but you can't understand what anyone's saying in the village because they speak a different language. But eventually you bump into a young girl named Fira, and she can't speak, but she uses hand signs, and eventually Vice is able to discern the local language from her hand steps. And after that point, you can just talk to everyone normally.
Yeah, the way the game denotes that they're speaking a different language is everything they say is in parentheses.
Yeah, and there's just a ton of rules in this city. It's a city of just rules upon rules upon rules. She says a rule that's in the tens of thousands, I think.
I like Fira's tour. It's really cute.
She says in response to all these complaints NieR has about rules, rules do not exist to bind you, they exist so you may know your freedoms. And with that, you try to see the King of Hassan, but it turns out he died for the Black Scrawl and they didn't cure it. But the prince has gone missing, so Kaine uses the debt that she's owed, because it turns out she saved Fira from wolves. That debt to the city she uses to gain permission to go to the temple that the prince ran off to, because otherwise, with the rules, only nobility would be allowed in, so they are not allowed to rescue their own prince. And this takes you to a Zelda dungeon.
Yeah, it even has the theme when you find an item. It makes a lot of very direct references to Zelda.
Yeah, it's really, really great.
The twist of this dungeon is that the rules that they mention in the city are in effect explicitly here, because each room will prevent certain actions. We've written in some way like Leaping Rabbit, so in some rooms if you jump you'll be reset to the beginning. So these are sort of puzzles too, and in most cases you just need to feel out the room to get the solution.
They're interesting puzzles, though. They're not your typical puzzle.
Yeah. You find the prince, who tries to be self-righteous, but he inadvertently breaks a rule and gets captured by a cube thing. Kaine also breaks a rule and gets captured by a cube, and once you finish the rest of the rooms, you fight a giant cube man.
Yeah, I love the cube boy. Also, he gets a unique boss track, which is a shame because it's really good.
Yeah, is that the one, Gods Bound by Rules?
Yep.
Which is a really cool track name for a man made of cubes. Because that's also the first boss of Gunstar Heroes on Sega Genesis.
Oh yeah.
Bravo, man. But once you do enough damage to the cube man, it turns into the spinning laser cube frame.
The cube man's name is, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, it's Shariar?
Shariar, yeah, from the 1001 Nights.
Yep.
After you beat the giant cube man, this is when the Zelda theme comes in. Because the prince finds a mask, which is what he's looking for, and he lifts it in the air, and it's exactly the pose from the 3D Zelda games.
I bust out laughing at that part.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, at this point in the game, I expected to contain a lot more stuff like this, but it's a one-off.
Well, the game imitates a lot of different styles of games and makes references to them.
Yeah, but this is the most explicit, and even the other references do not get as explicit as this.
Yeah.
But the reason the prince was after that mask is it was the king's mask, and it turns out that quote about rules existing to know your freedoms was from the king. NieR, because he is owed a debt, asked them to make a Rule 0 that lets people vote to change rules they dislike.
I always felt that that's a little weird, because it seems like it would mess up their culture.
Yeah.
Yep. Then you get the Dark Wall sealed verse, which I never used, ever.
Yeah, I can't remember ever using it.
Me either.
It's supposed to be defensive, but you can dodge and block in this game.
You're almost never in a position where you're seriously threatened.
Apparently, if you charge it to its max level, it absorbs magic, which might be useful?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a point, though, where you're under fire from heavy magic and have time to charge up a spell all the way. Also, if you're under heavy fire from magic, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, because you can just slash at the bullets or jump over them.
Yeah. But after this section, NieR has a dream of a young boy telling him there's this sealed verse in the Forest of Myth. And Popolo receives a letter from the mayor of the forest that is really, like, it says dream a lot in it. It just sort of descends into nonsense. And when you go to the forest, the mayor will tell you that everyone in the village has been cursed with something called the Death Dream, which turns out to be a text adventure.
Yep.
It's so great. It comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, then you have these sections where you read text and then you make a choice. And you have to answer riddles and stuff. There's a bunch of people in the village. You only have to release a couple, and also the mayor. But if you finish them all, you will get one of the best one-handed swords in the game, and it'll be the best one for a long, long time. Which is a katana called Faith.
Oh yeah, you get some sweet Hanzo steel.
Yep, and the dreams are kind of interesting. There's one that takes place in a desolate city, but NieR doesn't know what a modern city is, so the way he describes things is a little different. And you have to answer a riddle, which is one of those, like, B tells the truth about A, but C tells the truth about both. And I'm really bad at those, so I guessed the wrong answer of the 3 choices twice. And so I had to sit through the whole thing 3 times before I could finally do it.
The other dream I remember was there being, like, a flooding castle, and you have to get out of the castle in a certain number of quote-unquote turns.
Yeah.
The weird thing about that is some of the rooms, if you end up seeing them at all, then you're too far to make it out alive. So you should never see those descriptions. Also, if you die in that one, you actually die. Making it the most fatal thing in the whole game.
The death dream is some serious business.
But the most interesting detail you get from this is the mayor says in his dream he saw NieR, but not as himself. For clearing this area regularly, you get Dark Execution, which is a spell that impales things on a bunch of spikes that pop out of the ground. It attacks all around you, which never happens. It happens in the tutorial, but it doesn't really happen in the main game.
It looks really cool, though.
Yeah, it does. But then when you go home, you find out Yona has been writing letters to a young boy who lives in a mansion. You actually might have passed this on the way to Seafront and checked it out. You weren't able to go inside. But when you enter the courtyard, there's these creepy spider shades. And also the screen turns black and white and the music cuts out. And this section is a reference to Resident Evil.
Yep.
I love the Resident Evil mansion.
It's kind of a shame because the music's actually, like, pretty emotive and good. But then also in this segment, like, the young boy's butler will greet you at the door and that's how you're actually allowed in, but he vanishes. Kaine says she'll wait around and you go to look for the butler. Then Kaine vanishes. You're just running through these hallways and little tiny jump scares happen and Vice and NieR are just like, ah!
Also, all around the mansion are a bunch of, like, people who are statues.
Yeah, they're very lifelike stone statues with pained looks on their faces. And when in media has that ever not been because they've been petrified? But eventually, you meet the young boy who's the master of the mansion, named Emil, who is blind but can pick up where things are and what's going on with a incredibly strong sense of hearing. And it turns out that he can't look at things because they turn to stone when he looks at them. But yeah, the final sealed verse is hidden in the library, so you have a boss fight with a red book that looks suspiciously like the black one from the intro and also Vice, but it's dead silent.
Well, it laughs.
Yeah, but it attacks you with its pages, and when you defeat it, you get the final sealed verse, Dark Whirlwind, which I also never used.
Same. I think Emil, doesn't he help you out in this section?
Yeah.
Yes, Emil actually can petrify things when he looks at them, which kills them instant.
And it makes him the most useful party member.
Yeah, it's pretty striking, actually, to see it in action when you first start fighting, and he just kills something while you're still slashing away. And then on the way out, Kaine has, like, she whispers something to Emil, and has a heart-to-heart about being a freak, because she thinks she is one, and Emil feels that he is one as well. He's a really sad, lonely little child, fancy mansion with fancy clothes.
Emil is a very good boy.
He ends up being kind of like the conscience of the party. He's just adorable. He's my favorite character.
Yeah, he hasn't been really hardened the way that Kaine and NieR have, and he's not very haughty like Vice is.
He's not a magical talking book.
But it's also around this point in the game. The loading screens up to this point have been excerpts from Yona's diary, which is mostly stuff about, it snowed, so Dad said he'd stay with me till the snow passed, so I hope it never stops snowing. Or, Dad said Devil is put together in all the right places, and I don't know what that means. But you'll also start getting these ones that are just inverse color, and they look really stark, and mention things about the walls of Jericho being torn through, and reports to something called the World Purification Committee. Since these appear at random, like, you can't really quite piece them together, but it gives the suggestion that these are from another time and are talking about something that you also wouldn't understand without the extended material.
The very massive amount of backstory in this game.
Ooh, yeah.
When you get back home and you've collected all this stuff, the first thing that Yona says to NieR is to not hate her for being sick, which was really pretty sad. It's not the first game to do that, like Silent Hill 2 is the one that comes to mind for that, but it's performed really well here, I think.
The acting is really great, and it's just written in a way that feels kind of real.
Yeah, the strength I'd say for NieR, when people would ask what's good about it, I'd say it's emotionally genuine for a Japanese RPG in a way that a lot aren't. Not that a lot of them wouldn't have things that could affect you emotionally, but in a lot of cases the emotions in those are extremely heightened.
Yeah.
And, it just pushes things in a really far direction, whereas this one is pretty small in scale, considering the plot still involves powers that can save or end the whole world.
It feels like it doesn't try to manipulate you emotionally by just doing really over-the-top things, but just building characters you can connect with and who seem like people and not characters, and then having them respond in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, 8.4 did a really good job localizing the script for this game.
Yeah, I do have some qualms with the localization, but I'll get to that later.
Yeah. But at this point, NieR's determined to find Grimoire Noir, the Black Book. Because he has all the sealed verses, he's all set to save the world and cure everybody. But before he can visit the library, a meal collapses at the town gate, which, remember, space in this game is abstracted, so this frail young kid ran all this way, and he just says that something's coming, and a giant tentacled shade crashes through the town gate. The fight in the area was pretty destructive. This looks to be even more so, as you fight this thing as it is smashing through the town.
Yeah, this thing is absolutely massive.
On top of it, it's just like a ridiculously long fight compared to the other ones.
Yeah.
It goes on and on and on, and it changes more and more as you go.
Even though you can fight it and weaken it, it still breaks through, wrecks a lot of the town, and then heads straight for the library where NieR asked Yona to run off to, in case anything attacked the town. So you have to stop it from reaching the library. You kill it mostly, but the head comes off and breaks into the library. You can't kill it, so it gets pushed into the basement. In the midst of all of this, Kaine is trying to hold the door. The Shadow Lord and Grimoire Noir appear, and the Shadow Lord looks a lot like NieR. And Grimoire Noir is the Black Book from the opening, and this is the point where you realize the person you're playing in the tutorial is this guy.
I did not realize that because I was too caught up in all the events at the time.
It was in the back of my head the whole time I was playing, is what happened in those 1,312 years, and whatever it was turned the prologue NieR into this guy. And he's called the Shadow Lord because Grimoire Noir, who is voiced by the incredibly good at being villains DC Douglas, who we mentioned in the Resident Evil episode, ended up voicing Wesker, the most evil man. He is the voice of Grimoire Noir, and he tries to absorb Vice and says that their reunion with the Shadow Lord is what will bring this conflict to a close.
We shall become as one, you and I.
Become one.
Vice, you dumbass!
Kaine.
Start making sense, you rotten book, or you're gonna be sorry. Maybe I'll rip your pages out one by one, or maybe I'll put you in the goddamn furnace. How can someone with such a big smart brain get hypnotized like a little bitch, huh? Oh, Shadow Lord, I love you, Shadow Lord. Come over here and give Vice a big sloppy kiss, Shadow Lord. Now pull your head out of your goddamn ass and start fucking helping us!
I am one with the shadow. Bitch.
It requires them to also give up Yona.
It's worth mentioning that DC Douglas completely steals the scene he's in.
As he's wont to do. But you have a boss fight against Grimoire Noir here, and unlike the fight with the book in the library, in trying to absorb Vice, Noir has taken the sealed verses from him, so you have to fight him and get them back over the course of the boss fight. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. Shadowlord tries to spear Grimoire Vice, and NieR jumps in to take the hit for him. Shadowlord and Grimoire Noir fly off with Yona, and because Kaine is still holding the door trying to keep that shade in, the only solution she realizes is to have Emil petrify her into the door.
It's pretty sad.
Literally everything goes wrong.
That was another scene that was just really hard-hitting emotionally.
Then you get a 5-year time skip, and you see Shades in armor attacking some villagers when flying out of the sky like he was airdropped from a helicopter comes NieR with a hefty two-handed sword and a spear. Now you have 2 new types of weapons available to you to fight these guys off.
Spears are real busted.
Two-handed swords are said to be good for cracking armor. Their attacks are pretty slow though, and the most effective way to attack with them, as in a lot of games with jumping attacks and two-handed swords, is to jump and use the power attack, which will slam into the ground, and you can just do that repeatedly.
Shades start wearing armor, so your little triangle guard-breaking move starts coming in handy.
Except that spears have a forward-facing regular combo, and if you press the special attack button, you'll do a really strong dashing attack. Like, incredibly strong. I think someone messed up a number somewhere as to how much better these are than everything.
I felt a little bad when I used a spear during the final boss fight, because I felt like I shouldn't have won that easily.
Yeah, I still used other weapons occasionally.
Yeah.
But the spear is pretty much, if something's difficult, use the spear.
I mainly jumped between the spear and two-handed sword, but it was mostly just the DLC spear for most of the game.
Yeah, the upgrade materials for the DLC weapons are hard to come by though, and I ended up maxing out the DLC two-handed sword and didn't want to scrounge up the resources for the DLC spear.
I feel like they knew that spears are really good because I'm pretty sure the spear is the last weapon that you get from the DLC.
Yeah.
But after this, it turns out NieR has spent these 5 years hunting Shades looking for a lead. And actually, he has an eye patch now. It's just a thing that happened in the 5 years. I thought it would have been from getting stabbed by the Shadow Lord, but that was through the chest. So, just additionally, he's lost an eye.
Yes, a giant, stupid metal eye patch.
But the reason why you pick back up at this 5-year point is Emil sends NieR a letter and says he may have found a way to save Kaine.
Yay!
Yeah, and it turns out when you get to the mansion that there's a hidden sub-basement with a lab underneath it, so it's actually even more like Resident Evil than previously.
Except then the game turns into Diablo.
Yeah, it has a isometric 3/4 overhead perspective that you fight through the lab with. Mostly it's just there's some things hidden by the perspective that you need to find to progress, but it's pretty straightforward.
I remember it taking way longer than it should have.
I remember enjoying it, but I think that's just because I liked playing Diablo a lot. I think we should mention that Brother NieR's look completely changes between the time skip.
Yeah, that's true, because Father NieR, like an adult in 5 years, is not going to look that much different. Unless they lose an eye and need to wear a metal eye patch. But for Brother NieR's case, he was pretty young, so in 5 years he's much taller. And he doesn't have an eye patch, though.
He also doesn't wear his hair up in a really unusual way.
He doesn't look like a cockatoo. As you go through the lab, Emil will have those painful amnesia remembering headaches that people get in media all the time. But eventually you'll find a document with a picture of Emil and his twin sister, Halua. It turns out that they were being engineered as weapons using something called Gestalt technology. You will see how this turned out for Halua in the next room, because Emil identifies his sister as this giant skeleton baby thing that's been speared into a wall.
It's adorable.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that Halua was designed to be the ultimate weapon, and Emil was basically designed to keep the ultimate weapon under control should it go mad with power.
But it turns out he couldn't, which is why they did what they did to her. And when Emil walks up to her, she swallows him whole. So the boss fight after this, she'll crawl on the wall like she's Spider-Man, and you have to shoot her down with magic. When you kill her, Emil, in like a vision, says goodbye to Halua in her human form. And then in this big storm of energy, Emil seems really reticent to let NieR see him, but when it all clears up, he's now a really bizarre-looking skeleton.
Please hug this little skeleton boy.
Also, that scene slayed me, because Emil was afraid to have NieR see him because he thought he'd look like a freak, and NieR just says that he'll look out for him no matter what and support him.
Yeah.
That hit me really hard as like a trans woman.
Yeah, that's a really good scene, and Emil's voice actress sells it.
Oh, yeah.
Considering that Emil felt like a freak before any transformation happened, he was just a little kid who couldn't look at people. But that's the other thing. Once NieR comforts him, he realizes, I can look at him with my eyes for the first time ever. He says that NieR looks cool.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
It's definitely my favorite scene in the game.
Yeah. Then Emil uses his power to restore Xain, and she unpetrifies, but she is still passed out. And the shade from 5 years ago immediately breaks out at full strength. It's still just a head, but it's as pissed as ever. But when NieR fights it, he just says it feels much easier now. Because of the 5 years, he's just become a total badass. And uses Dark Hand to squeeze the life out of it, literally.
I think NieR actually does gain a couple of levels in the time skip.
Emil seems kind of nervous around Xain. I like the comparison here, because she says to Emil, like, yeah, I recognize you right away. And then she looks at NieR and says he looks like shit. But then with all this settled, Popola wants to talk to NieR, and the villagers feel really uncomfortable with Xain and Emil, and want them to sleep outside the village. Despite everything they've done, NieR is pissed.
Yep.
But Xain doesn't seem to care much, and Emil loves camping with Xain.
Yeah, that was really cute, and Kaine's like, don't talk about that, it makes me seem like less of a badass.
Yeah. On the upside, Popola informs NieR of a trade waterway that has opened up, because there was a dock in the town before, but you couldn't really do anything with it. And this lets you fast travel to villages, and also to a dock in the Northern Plains area, which you need to get to the Lost Shrine's back entrance, because the front had crumbled after the events of your last visit. When you go back, there's a lot more box-pushing puzzles added to the rooms out of nowhere. They're still not hard, but there are some sub-bosses now on the other floors. And maybe the first sign you get that, like, NieR, outside of his single-minded focus, is probably not a very good person. Vice notices when you get swarmed by a lot of the small shades. We seem to be surrounded by a mob of helpless puppies, and NieR just effortlessly says, just kick them aside.
Yeah, NieR becomes a lot more ruthless after the time skip.
Yeah, a lot of townspeople will say it too, that seem different. You kind of scare me.
Definitely changed as a person over those 5 years and just is pissed as hell and just wants to crush all the shades.
And get Yona back, no matter what.
Like, he becomes very obviously single-mindedly focused on that, to the point where he might not be a good person.
But he's not, like, unrealistically just, like, mean to everyone, but just the way he carries himself, and, like, it's the little things that he says that would key you in. But, yeah, once you get up to the top of the shrine, it turns out that one of the 2 statue guardians you fought at the beginning is still alive, and has a bunch of other shades with it that die when they get exposed to the sunlight. And this boss fight actually is a whole lot of nothing for most of it. When you kill the shade, its lance goes flying and impales Xain, who then revives in this feral shade form, which is super aggressive and doesn't appear to know herself at all.
Yeah, you punch her out of it.
And then she wakes up fine. This is, I think, the first time you see her take what appears to be a fatal hit and, like, get back up from it. but you acquire a stone fragment from this place, and you have a choice of whether you want to go to the Junk Heap or the Forest of Myth. It looks to fill in part of a key you need to assemble.
That's your main quest for part 2.
Yeah. If you go to the Junk Heap, you get a flashback of Jacob and Gideon trying to find stuff in the Junk Heap, and Jacob gets crushed by a bunch of falling stuff. Gideon sees a robot with a shade, just like looking on. And when you go visit there, like, NieR will find out that Jacob died. So Gideon is just singularly focused, like NieR, on wanting to kill this robot with this shade. He gives you a broken sword called the Iron Will, which is a two-handed style sword, but it's totally junk because the entire blade's missing. But he says he'll fix it for you if you get him some memory alloy and also promise to kill the shade and the robot. You go through the Junk Heap earlier, and we didn't mention, but it is when we talk about the combat being let down by the design of the game. This is that area, because it's just boxy rooms for the most part, and doors, and some of them you can go in and some of them you can't. You just fight these robots, and it's not very dynamic or anything. But at this point in the game, you have to go deeper than you ever did.
Yeah, on the other hand, it still has my favorite theme from the main game. Wretched Automaton is really good.
I like the a cappella version on the bonus soundtrack. Also, Gideon wants to kill not just that one robot, he wants to kill all robots.
Yep.
Yeah, so in a way, his singular focus is on killing all robots, just like NieR wants to kill all the shades.
Jacob was also voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, and now that Gideon's older, he's voiced by Yuri Lowenthal.
It's a rite of passage for young children. In a weird Zelda-like touch in this dungeon, there'll be bombs that come out of certain dispensers, and you need those to clear passageways. Really not much to it. But you fight a boss, which is a big robot that looks kind of like the one from the flashback. I think I actually died to these one time. It's because they're a little stronger than you might think. But you kill it and you get memory alloy, and Gideon will need time to repair Iron Will. So you can go to the forest, or you can talk with Popola. For the forest, you can enter the Great Tree's memories, which says it holds all the world's memories, and it'll tell you some stories with some specific details in them that you actually have to remember to answer questions later. But one story it can't tell you is a red dragon falls from the sky, and it can't seem to remember the rest, but it says it was a favorite story of the trees.
The tree is a very, morbid fellow.
Yeah, all the stories have pretty sad outcomes, but you have to remember the details. There'll be like a color mentioned or a number, and that's all you have to keep track of. And this is also handled in text adventure form, so that when it gets to the point where it turns out a shade has possessed the tree and made playthings of all the different memory crystals or whatever, you have to solve its riddles, which will stop the shade but also make the tree lose itself. And it appears to die. And you'll get another stone fragment.
The tree is named Sleeping Beauty, by the way.
If you go back to the town, you can get a letter from Gideon that'll tell you that the sword is ready. And then you'll get it, and it's pretty massive. Like, this is, feels contractually obligated for a lot of RPGs to have a sword that references the Dragon Slayer from Berserk. This one's that.
Yep.
Weapons have a weight rating in their descriptions, but I could not notice any difference in swing speed, and when you upgrade weapons, they all inevitably get heavier.
I think it's supposed to make armor fall off easier because you're hitting it harder?
Yeah, that would make more sense in terms of upgrading everything and it getting heavier.
Remember noticing very, very small differences in swing speed, but they weren't really significant.
It's milliseconds in a game where entire seconds are not precious in terms of decision making. The only move that really requires a lot of precision in this game is totally optional, but if you block an enemy attack right as it hits, you'll perform a counterattack, which looks really cool. The hit effects are really good, but you never, ever need to do it.
You can also do, finishing blows on enemies, which I also never did.
Yeah. So you get the Iron Will, which you don't have to use, it really doesn't matter, but you now descend one more time into the Junk Heap, as deep as you could possibly go, and you will fight the robot with the little shade on top piloting it. And as you damage it, it'll eventually form wings out of junk, but it'll also start slamming its head into the ceiling and the Shade will just like scream a lot during this fight. Once you damage the robot enough, it just collapses, and it says like must defend my mission repeatedly. Then the Shade appears to split into 3 different ones, but then you just kill all those, and Shade dies. Gideon shows up and screams his ass off at this robot.
Hitting that thing won't bring your brother back.
But he's dead! And it's this bastard's fault! And hitting it makes me feel better! Just wait! You freak! You goddamn freak! I'm gonna explore this entire mountain now! I'll make terrible weapons! Killing machines! No one can stop me!
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very clear that he is not doing so well.
Yeah, even Vices is like, it's really lost to revenge. Even after killing this thing, it's not over for him. Nor will it ever be.
Also, wasn't his arm removed by himself just out of anger?
Yeah, he has a robotic arm now.
I think it's the same arm that he saw of his brothers.
Yeah.
Pretty messed up.
A sad ending to a sad story.
This gives you another part of the key. And now, when you head back to the village, you can talk to Popola. This is the choice you had earlier. She said she received a letter from the Aerie that says they're open to business and they've shut themselves out from the world too long, and they know about the sacrifice keyword that is part of the key you're assembling. And when you go there, this part is pretty unsettling because the ambiance of the village hasn't changed much, and people in their homes are all doomed saying that they're all going to die and shouldn't come here. But when you enter, like, I guess what you could call the town square at the back, there's all these shops set up, though they sell the bare minimum that any shop could possibly have.
They don't have anything unique.
Yeah, which makes sense, because they freak out and they turn into shades. And this section is total calamity. There's people turning into shades, and some people aren't. At one point, Kaina even kills a woman who appears to be totally normal, and Emil is freaking the hell out, because he doesn't want to kill any of the people.
This all started because NieR said to a guy, "I'm gonna kill all the shades."
The way they freak out is just everyone. It's a very strange scene.
Kaina gets cut down by the shade woman she killed, so she's out of commission again. But after you kill enough of the shades, a giant black swirl appears in the town center, and it coalesces into this giant blossoming flower shade with a big eye in the center.
It looks really cool.
This boss is mostly just aiming practice. The petals of the flower will block the eye, so you have to just aim carefully while other shades attack you on the ground. Emil thinks that some of these shades might have formed into people, but Weiss insists that that's not what's happened. That's enough to convince Emil to pin down this shade with a giant energy beam, straight out of Dragon Ball Z or something, but you have to go around to its back. And when you weaken it here, you'll have one last fight with it. NieR and Emil combine their spells to kill the shade, but then Emil goes haywire. He's unable to stop himself, and Weiss notes that the ultimate weapon is being unleashed. And he creates this giant wave of energy that, when everything clears, has wiped out the entire area. And this scene was one that got me the most, because it really lays out how these characters interact.
I killed innocent people. I killed them all.
But you saved our lives. Didn't you? If it wasn't for you, we'd all be dead. We owe you. It's all right. Don't look back.
God, that scene where he just looks out across that desolate spot where this village was and says, "Don't look back," always gets me.
At that point, it is very, very clear that NieR is really cold towards the people who aren't close to him. and that when it comes to killing shades, he will do literally anything short of hurting one of his friends.
It's definitely a real strong scene.
Also the theme that plays here, Emil's Sacrifices. Probably one of the better sad songs in a video game. Then you get the sacrifice key, and yeah, I guess that's what the sacrifice was. Everyone in that village. But hey, you have one piece of the key left, and you get a letter from the King of Assad inviting NieR to his wedding.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, and it turns out his bride-to-be is Fira. But he confides in the party. It's been a bad harvest, and the wolf attacks are just getting worse and worse. NieR tries to reassure him that he just has to be strong and push through. Not at the wedding the next morning. See a lot of people like dancing in time, throwing out flowers, and Kaine's being a sourpuss about the whole thing. It's a pretty fun scene until a town guard walks in and collapses, covered in blood, and the wolf shade kills Fira.
Just snaps her off.
Well, she doesn't die immediately. You have time to fight them off. But this scene is one that is really emblematic of Yoko Taro's writing process, which he talked about at the Game Developers Conference, GDC, because it uses two of his techniques that he built around and explains why NieR is a really compact story despite having a huge amount of extended material. And it involves things he calls reverse script writing and photo thinking. So reverse script writing is imagining a scene of emotional impact and then picking apart what would earn that impact and working back from there. And part of the reason he said he did it is the cost of game development. You can't feel your way out, really. So in this case, though, we started with a simple idea. A girl dies, and worked back from there. What would make it tragic that she died? What are the things about her that, if you didn't know she was going to die, that would endear you to her? And in some cases, it's that she couldn't speak, she didn't have any family, she grew up through indentured servitude, and now she was set to marry the king. All these things were meant to play into this scene. And with photo thinking, it's freezing that moment in time and seeing all the details that would fill out the tragedy, which includes her telling the king not to freak out because everyone's watching, everyone looks up to the king, and she thanks the king for marrying her. Those are her dying words. So yeah, that worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Fira is 10 and the king is 15, so that's pretty sad.
The king now has sworn revenge on the wolves. But what this scene does in terms of contrasting it is that the king's advisor tells him not to go alone. The king won't listen to any of them. Going off to fight the wolves by himself would go against all their rules. The king mentions that the rules didn't save Fira or guarantee her a good life. Then the advisor reveals that he got the approval of everyone in the city so that the advisor and the royal guard, the men of the mask, could join him. And this actually pulls him back a little bit. The difference between the King of Assad and Gideon is that Gideon didn't have anyone, and he was just in isolation with his anger for that whole time, and it took him over. NieR, in a similar sense, like his friends were Emil and Kaine, and Kaine was indisposed in those 5 years, and it also drove him to be a lot more brutal. So you kill off the entire wolf pack, and then fight the wolf shade. Vice notes that these things are unrelenting in their assault, and they target the king specifically and the advisor. Finally finish it off, and you get the loyal Cerberus fragment of the key, and it's completed. But after you defeat the wolf, the king has buried Fira. He's still in distress, but then Vice asks him to remember what would Fira have said. She would be happy that you gave her a good life, and not to lose hope. You head back to the Lost Shrine through the rear passageway that you took from fast travel, and now it's mostly full of armored shades and mini-bosses on your way out. There's no more block-pushing puzzles also.
Yeah, it feels like a real final approach.
And the room where you fought the 2 statue guardians, a seal disappears on the back, and an old-style elevator shows up, and you can ride to a rooftop garden. This has these birds giving you like sort of riddles for Vice to answer. And I mean, their voices are deep and dramatic, which is kind of funny. But their riddles are pretty much asking if you understand the plot.
What is the destination of souls?
I answer. They are placed in their corresponding shells.
Very well. You are acknowledged as master. You may enter.
And this will all be explained a little better in just a second, because you solve these riddles and you're free to advance and see Devla and Popola, who ask you to turn back. And if you do, you actually just get teleported back to the village, like nothing happened, but you have nothing else to do. But if you choose to fight them, they'll reveal that they were working with the Shadow Lord, and they point their wands at Vice, and he gets electrocuted and begins stuttering. Then they disappear.
You also lose all your magic.
Because they reveal that the power of the sealed verses came from them all along, and they just needed Vice to reacquire them. Then the next room you go into is a ballroom with these dancing ghosts. But once you advance far enough, they turn into shades as well, and you fight them off. You're waiting for Kaini to kick down a door. But when she does, the door opens, and there's those little like shade orbs from the boss fights you've seen earlier all roll over her and knock her out. And after you kill enough of them, they form up on a shade wizard and forms into a giant version of the boar you fought earlier to get the item to do boar drifting with.
It's the boar's revenge.
And as you're fighting it, Kaine responds about not needing to be forgiven to apparently no one. And then when you kill it, another giant boar appears behind you with armor on, and it starts spewing poison gas. And when you kill it, it comes back to life again. So eventually, Kaine recovers, and you have to escape up a set of stairs. If it catches up to you at this point, you die instantly. It's really not too bad. Like, there's some items and boxes on the way, but it's all basic healing items. But once you get up the stairs, it comes into another arena where you have to fight it off. But then the King of Facade appears with the men of the mask, because they found out where you were going and they want to help you.
They're good buddies.
It appears like they're just holding it off to open the way for NieR and Kaine and Emil to go on. But then they shut the door without following to hold this thing off. As you head up to the next room, Devla and Popola give Vice the Project Gestalt documents, which reveal the full shape of the plot, as far as you need to know for the game.
Yeah, because a lot more stuff has happened.
The Gestalts are basically the souls of humans that have been extracted from their bodies, and they were extracted to avoid white chlorination syndrome, which was ending the world. The replicants were copies of their bodies that did not have a soul, and they were both rebuilding the world, but also intended for the Gestalts to reoccupy so that they could basically create humanity again and avoid the complete extinction from the white chlorination syndrome in the Legion.
The white chlorination syndrome in Legion are things we'll discuss later. They're hinted at in some of those loading screen journals where they mention that people are suffering cases and these other humans are suffering from some kind of relapse.
The thing that they didn't account for in the Gestalt project was that they didn't expect the replicants to gain sentience.
Yeah, they were supposed to not be sentient so that they could just be inhabited easily. Also, they needed a Gestalt that was stable. Normally, Gestalts will just go mad after a certain point and just become rampaging shades. But the original NieR was kind of their last hope in that he was stable as a Gestalt and didn't have a chance of descending into madness.
Yeah, he was the first one to successfully undergo the Gestalt process.
And so they needed him so that they could make sure everyone else does not just become a mindless shade again.
So this whole setup involving the Shadow Lord and this prophecy was all to drive Replicant NieR to utilize Grimoire Vice, collect the sealed verses, and rejoin This was all a narrative constructed by Devil and Popola to make this happen.
Yeah, they aren't really good at their jobs.
Yeah, they kinda suck.
It's also revealed that they are androids, which is why they do not age.
Yeah, I think Bro NieR mentions that it's really weird that they don't age.
For this next scene, because of course this is all completely mind-blowing to NieR, who's just known them as people in the village who took him in, doesn't accept any of this and wants them to just cease what they're doing. So you have a boss fight where Devil will fight you on the ground level while Popola is standing on the stage thing shooting you from afar. When you kill Devila, Popola cries, which neither of them knew they were able to do. And the way Popola freaks out here is pretty disquieting.
Popola. Let's stop this now.
Stop. Stop. You want me to stop? Luxury to stop? You cut down my sister like an animal, and you tell me to stop? Popola, wait! It doesn't have to. No one stops! It's way too late to stop! No one stops!
Man, I hope it only took one take to get that.
Yeah, her VA's real good.
When you beat her, though, NieR doesn't kill her. There's just a bridge that NieR and Xain and Emil are going to cross. Popola destroys it, so Emil creates this orb that they all float across in. But then Popola uses her magic to try and hold back the little bubble that they're all floating in. So Emil, in an effort to get Xain and NieR across, sends them out in a separate bubble, floats towards Popola, and blows himself up.
That also got me pretty hard, because Emil gets really scared as he's blowing himself up.
Like he tries to reassure himself.
Yeah. Again, in terms of being emotionally genuine, a lot of media to make you feel better about someone sacrificing themselves would have them throw some brave words about their adventure and then die. But before he does, he just realizes, I just want to see them one more time. Yeah. Xain has to slap NieR into action again.
He doesn't want to proceed because the two people who made sure he and Yona had a life are gone. Emil is gone, and he probably thinks that the king and his friends aren't faring too well at whatever they're doing.
Yeah. So NieR enters the room and sees Yona laying on a bed, passed out. Tries to run to her, but the Shadow Lord appears. They seem set to fight, but Yona wakes up, and she calls to her father and walks past NieR to the Shadow Lord. And it turns out that replicant Yona has been successfully fused into Gestalt Yona, but she can still hear replicant Yona's voice calling for her own father. And she says, it's just not right that I can be with my dad and she can't be with hers. So she walks to a window, and you see a light leave her body. This drives the Shadow Lord into a frenzy, and you have a final boss fight with him.
I like the final boss track a lot, and I like that it's not in anywhere special, it's just in the Shadow Lord's room, and it's not like a massive, ominous throne room, it's literally just the room where he is. There's a little bed and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of a cruddy room. For how glamorous everything else was leading up to that, it's very simple and kind of sparse.
It's a regular little girl's room, just with a bunch of open space in it.
It's also worth mentioning that you're also in the ruins of some city at this point, because there's a big distance between the Lost Shrine and wherever this is.
So, partway through the battle with the Shadow Lord, who mostly is just close range attacks and bullets or whatever, pretty straightforward, unfortunately, I'd say in this case. But at one point, Vice just sort of falls over, because he's been floating alongside NieR this whole time, and then he reveals that he has used up almost all of his power over these 5 years.
But I fear this is where our journey ends.
Vice!
Oh, and remember what I told you about using my full name? Well, forget it. I've grown rather fond of Vice.
Vice. I knew you'd come around.
Don't let it go to your head now.
Vice destroys himself to destroy Grimoire Noir, and now you just have a no magic final showdown with the Shadow Lord, but really the Shadow Lord sprays bullets everywhere and you have to break through without any magic and hit him a few times.
That fight is really notable because every time you hit him, a layer of the music disappears, and when he just has one hit left, the only thing that's there is a music box version of the Shadow Lord's theme.
Yeah, it's really cool. NieR even appears to hesitate for a moment before striking the final blow and killing the Shadow Lord.
He really wonders if it's all been worth it.
To reawaken Yona, NieR has to say to her the name of who she loves more than anyone, which sensibly should be Dad, but it's whatever you entered your name as for your save file.
Yeah, that warmed my heart a lot.
Yeah, it is pretty cute. Yona wakes up, and Kaine says she has her own shit to take care of, so she walks off. And you get a flashback to NieR and young Yona just relaxing in the sun, and a shot of the Shadow Lord and older Yona walking into the light. And the English version of the credits song Ashes of Dreams plays, and that's ending A of NieR. After the credits roll, though, you get a thing that says to play again, and you'll see the story from Kaine's perspective, which doesn't mean you play as her, but it changes some things about the story that really turn things around in a way that I had never seen before.
Yeah. Basically, you hear things from Kaine's perspective.
Yeah.
Alright, so normally when I cut the YouTube videos for the podcast or anything, I just do it around like a middle point, around some kind of break. But for this episode, after we do a couple of things, I'm going to cut it here because maybe things sound underwhelming or hard or annoying or whatever. But really, like, when I played it, it didn't really feel that way. It's sort of a thing that, upon reflection, I noticed more. And I don't think it's a game that, like, everyone will like. I mean, it depends on how much you like action RPGs. But really, I think it's pretty good, and if it was just ending A, I think it would have been a pretty worthy and unique experience.
It's a really janky kind of game, but you can tell it's got a lot of heart put into it.
As, well, I wouldn't say all of Kavi's games have heart so much. I mean, Drakengard 1 is what I refer to as the gaming equivalent of a jackhammer drilling into your skull, but in like a novel way. It's probably one of the most hostile to the player games I've ever played. And something like Winback 2 is very middle of the road. It's not very refined, but it's a fun game. I would play it again. The only thing that's really held me back is there's just so many games in the world to play.
I can't play anymore. My PS3 is dead.
Yeah.
I'd have to get out my 360 and don't really want to go through the entire game again.
That's fair.
I really enjoyed the story and the gameplay was alright, but it's not something I'd want to redo, especially given the time commitment to do it.
And a lot of those story moments, I can sort of remember how that was when I see the cutscenes and stuff, but you can't really go back and have that experience again.
Yeah.
It's the same reason why I would never want to replay Drakengard 3, because that's not a game I want to play once, but I'm glad I played it.
I have yet to get around to that, but I probably should. So, to get some things out of the way that we'd also do at the end of the podcast, the reason I'm saying this is the twist that the game takes at ending B and onwards and the implications of the extended material. Really, I would want you to experience it for yourself if you can. Normally I wouldn't tell people to stop listening to my podcast within a regular update schedule partway through and remember to come back later, but it means that much to me, I guess is what I'd say.
It completely changes how you see everything in the game, and that is a pretty big accomplishment. And it makes sense in the context of the game. It's not just some gibberish someone thought of. From the beginning, there were connections that you could see, but you never got full context for. And once you do, it completely reshapes everything the game was setting out to do.
So actually, unlike a lot of games that are called classics, NieR has actually gotten more affordable since when I bought it. When I got it, $40 was the cheapest I could find, and that had gone up from the previous prices. But now if you want to get like a used copy from Amazon, it's like $20 for PS3 or $12 for the Xbox 360. You can also get NieR Replicant for around that price, the Japanese import version. Well, for like $50. You know, it's maybe a bit more than I'd recommend paying for it, but there's like an English patch for the game. In an interview, Yoko Taro mentioned that there was going to be a PlayStation Vita version, but they never got around to making it. And I think this would work on a Vita, but I don't know that portability gains this game a lot, except for if you want to grind out weapon upgrades or something.
It probably didn't pan out because Kavia got closed.
Yeah, and also, like, I feel like it is really well structured for a portable game.
That's true.
And for the different versions of the game, Replicant and Gestalt, the way a lot of those events played out, also, like, you have to imagine they'd have a different impact. Like, that 5-year time skip, that was a sort of singular-minded older man becoming more singular-minded, whereas NieR's the brother was much more optimistic, and the events that lead that time skip snatch all that away.
I remember someone said this, but post-time skip Brother NieR, you can easily see how he could become Father NieR.
Yeah. And also, having to kill Devila and Popola, again, those are people who took in Father NieR and his daughter. But in terms of Brother NieR, they also probably helped raise him.
Yep, he has to kill his own moms. A couple more tidbits from behind the game. The original spelling of Yona's Japanese name was apparently pretty similar to the biblical figure of Jonah, but that didn't fly in America because, yeah, I don't think they wanted to have a sister named Jonah because that would probably confuse people. And the other thing is that in Kaine's original concept, she was much more feminine looking, and she had to hide the fact that she was extremely violent.
And I feel like that archetype, because I know some people don't like Kaine being really brash. I feel like the alternative is characters that have to hide it, and that's a lot more common.
Her design is highly sexualized, but her personality kind of helps make it not feel like cringeworthy in the way it is for many other things. She's not an ideal anime girlfriend or something like that. She is a very violent and horrible person who has some soft spots, but also she's a lot better developed and a lot more interesting than if she was just there for fan service or something like that. And they do a pretty good job of not creeping on her, despite the way she's designed.
NieR just thinks it's weird that she dresses that way. Vice thinks it's dumb, and Emil doesn't really care.
Emil is just happy to have a friend to have slumber parties with.
Also, for this bit, we're going to read the emails, because the two we got were not too hot on the game, and they didn't get further than we did by quite a bit. So I figured we'd read them here and not end the podcast on that note. So our first one comes in from Amber. Keep in mind this was years ago, as I haven't touched the game since. It's difficult to remember all the details. So a couple of years ago, maybe give or take 3, my friends were really pushing me to buy NieR because they were playing it. OMG, it's so great, and it was the best, supposedly. After a couple weeks of pestering, I went and looked and found that I could get the game for like $5, and was like, okay, whatever, it's only $5. I ended up hating the game. I thought the opening sequence was fairly interesting, and that maybe, just maybe, the characters other than whoever the little girl in that flashback, flash forward, flash whatever scene would eventually grow on me. After wandering the town for what was actually hours of trying to find plot and make things happen, I think I finally triggered a quest or something. I attempted the quest, succeeded, passed out, and woke up back in that horrid barren wasteland of a town. I had no attachment to any characters, the fights were a mess, I wasted about 5 hours of my life playing the game, that my friends were screaming about online. The worst part was that GameStop wouldn't buy it off me, so I'm 75% certain I still own the game, somewhere in storage. So, like I said, for some reason, with this game, I didn't really find myself unaware of what I was supposed to do. I guess that was different for some people in different points in this game, and I can see how that's frustrating. I mean, just get me playing a puzzle game of any kind, and you'll see that same frustration come out of me.
Yeah, I think the point of the game that's kind of the hardest to get just by playing is knowing how to get all the endings, because the last 2 endings have requirements that are kind of frustrating if you have no idea what to do.
Yeah, I just realized that even though the game tells you what to do, it doesn't exactly tell you how to go about doing it.
Yep. And if you're doing it without any guides or anything, you have to go through a bunch of the most tedious side quests to find the ones that you're actually supposed to be doing.
One of the side quests that you do to get the C and D endings is really cool, though.
Mm-hmm.
I just happened to chance into that, actually, which was really fortunate for me again. Like, I apparently just had one of the most, like, blessed NieR playthroughs of all time.
Yeah, I had spoiled myself by that point and just started reading guides on it.
I just kind of tried to do as many side quests as I could that weren't pains in the ass, and kind of wound up working.
Yeah, because in some cases it's like, oh, gather this uncommon material for me. Well, I did a little bit of going through the junk heap more times than I needed to, which, yeah, takes a certain mindset. But I was just looking for certain upgrade materials and I didn't get them, but I just ended up flush with other stuff I needed to complete other side quests. Alright, so one more email. This comes from Booker. Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying, 1, I don't like NieR, and 2, I understand that it's still a good game. It just isn't a good game for me. 3, I got as far as learning to fish, and then stopped playing, so take that as you will. My first problem with NieR is that initially the game felt enjoyable, and then it really quickly became dull. I was a big fan of the opening sequence, where you're just killing guys non-stop. I liked it because I enjoyed exploring the combat mechanics of the game. Then it threw me into the actual game, and the world was so overwhelmingly vast that I felt as though the entire combat tutorial was rendered pointless. Obviously, I wasn't going to be fighting a ton of guys again anytime soon. I don't like the protagonist. A big reason I didn't play very far into NieR was because the cast was not compelling in the slightest. The characters who did have personality, though, I couldn't stand. I met the book, who was funny, but usually just irritating. I met the girl in her underwear, who was both frustrating, abrasive, and only wore underwear. Not much else to say there. What's striking to me about NieR is that it's not a bad game. Quite the opposite, I know there's a good game somewhere in it, which is why, despite myself, I am excited for Automata. But NieR is the exact opposite of what I want my games to be. I like games with a lot of focus, games that know exactly what they want to be, and that isn't NieR. NieR tries to do a lot of different things instead of just doing one thing very well. The worst of this is the combat, as it seems like there's a great deal of depth to it, but at no point I actually had an opportunity to explore that depth. The boss fights felt too gimmicky to really make use of the tools, and the regular moves just weren't compelling to fight. NieR made a bad first impression on me, I gave it a lot of chances, and nothing held my interest enough for me to finish the game. I just want to be clear, I don't hate NieR, I think it's a terrible game or anything of the sort. It is just really exceptionally not for me, and that's fine. I'm just not part of this demographic. Well, there wasn't really much more to the combat than that, actually, so you did it.
The combat's not that deep.
Also, in terms of the world being vast, I mean, memory compresses space, but really, you can run through a lot of the areas in a couple of minutes on foot.
Yeah.
A minute or less if you have a boar.
Yeah, it's just open?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the wide open plains of Skyrim or, the sort of dense, stacked structures of something like Dragon's Dogma. It's more akin to like the N64 Zelda games, really.
It definitely felt that way to me.
I mean, we've had the whole episode to discuss all those things. If that answered your questions or not about how the rest of the game is, or invoked some kind of interest, then, I'd hope it'd do that, but I can see how it still wouldn't. You play the game, you had your experience with it. It'd be difficult to divorce yourself from that.